911 Study Committee. I'm Chris Brady, co-chair with Kevin Phelps with the City of Glendale. So we're thankful. Thank you for being here this morning. We will make sure as you speak that you turn your mics on. Those participating via Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. I don't think we've received any requests today, though. If you'd like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located on the information table and give it to MAG staff. If you've parked in the garage, parking validators are available on the information table. If you purchase a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. We'll now begin the meeting with a roll call of all members. Can we have that roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will go through the list of members. When I call your name, please indicate you are present for the record. Dale Nanagay.
Present.
Thank you. Dan Cotterman.
Here.
Thank you. Joshua Wright.
Here.
Thank you. David Raymer.
Present.
Thank you. Kevin Phelps.
Present.
Thank you. Santiago Rodriguez. Chris Brady.
Here.
Thank you. Travis Cutright.
Present.
Thank you. Brittany Brunet.
Present.
Thank you. Scott Walker.
Present.
Thank you. Jesse Cooper.
Present.
Thank you. Robert Bokinski.
Present virtually.
Thank you. Karen Sutherland.
Here.
Thank you. And Catherine Masters. All right, Chair, we do have a quorum.
All right, thank you very much. Again, thank you everyone for being here today. We have an agenda that is before us. We mentioned call the audience again. We don't have any requests have been received at this point. So we'll go on to the item number 3. So what we'd like to do today is spend a little time just kind of gathering our thoughts about or getting everybody on the same page as where we are in the current 7-year plan, financial side of this. We've asked each group also to make a brief presentation from each of the groups who are represented here today. And then at the end, we'll have a discussion about where we go forward from here. Obviously, we need to look at the future of the 7-year plan, but also we're going to have a broader conversation about current 911 and where we are today and what we feel like we need to do together as a group, as a region to move forward in the best direction. So that everything's on the table. So make sure you feel comfortable with that conversation. But first, we kind of want to plow the ground and get some background, kind of make sure we're all, if nothing else, using the same glossary of terms. So Kevin and I can know what difference between English and technocrat. So with that, let's begin with the status update of the current 7-year plan. Liz Graber, 911 Administrator, will provide this update. Liz, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Brady. So when we developed the strategic plan with the consultant in 2017, we came up with 5 areas of focus, and that's what we'll brief on. These areas all started with an objective of what we wanted to accomplish. It also included tasks that would need to be done by my team, the PSAPs and MAG, in getting those objectives met. So I'm going to give a really high-level brief overview of it. I'm trying not to get too much in the weeds, but I'm happy to go in more detail as if needed. So if we'll take a look at the first one, is the EZNet 911 network. And the objective, and I won't read through it, but you'll see words in there that are still true today that we haven't changed: reliable, secure, redundant, and diverse. Those are areas that we like in 911. that allows the help eliminate single points of failure in 911 call delivery. So under those tasks, these are the things that we've completed. We were able to bring in text to 911 that went live April of 2018. Prior to that, Lake Havasu Police Department was the only PSAP in the state that had text to 911, and we were able to bring all the Maricopa region up at once and provide 911 to our biggest population. A selective router is a equipment that we have that's used to manage 911 wireless call management, routes it to the appropriate PSAP. We had old legacy; those have been replaced. We can now exchange calls with 911 centers in the state that we traditionally could not. A good example are those in the frontier, northern Arizona, because of technology that had been used for years and years. You couldn't cross the 911 to go to 911. You had to transfer it to their 10-digit line, and we are able to do that now. We have network centers that are mirrored. We were able to do that so that they have enough resources at each that if one fails, it can carry on 911 traffic without a problem. We've advanced our protection. We can monitor the network, which is always one, and we begin virtualization. So those were goals that we had. But some of the things that we have are pending. And the ones that are highlighted at the beginning, these are all tied into a 911 project, the IP project that we're involved in with the state. The state put out a RFP looking for next generation 911 core services. And they were able to secure a vendor that allows the state to build their 911 network with the exception of the Maricopa region. We had a 911 network in place. We added some additional functionality, and we were able to use that project with the state to be able to upgrade to receive core service. And at a high level, I know we'll be giving a 911 overview on how it works in our next meeting, but just as a high level, when you make your 911 call from a wireless phone, it sends the phone number and the voice, and then it does a lookup on which tower you're calling from and comes up with that information by triangulating it. But with IP, what we're moving to is the same. It's getting information from your phone, your smartphone. So just like when you are getting an Uber or ordering a pizza and they see exactly where you're at, your phone will start delivering that, and it will deliver it with the voice. So that information will come in a data packet along with the voice. So we're excited about that. And not only us, but it's going to go statewide. Provide a minimum of 3 diverse telecommunication carriers to each of the PSAPs. Remember, we like reliability, diversity, and secure networks. So we try to have different providers. We lack 3 PSAPs from meeting that. The problem we run into is facilities in the area. So sometimes it's cost prohibitive if you have, especially one of our more rural areas, that they cannot get, we can't get a network or fiber to that location yet, or we'd have to pay a tremendous amount of money. So we look at everything, whether it's dark fiber, whether it's microwave, through the system that we have here in the valley. And so then the 5 carriers are for our networks. We're at 4. Once again, we're limited on what is available to us. We'd like to harden it to go to 5. And then other virtualization, microsegmenting, all the things that sound fancy, and we'll explain it another time. But so once we go into those top 3 that are highlighted, those are all related to the project. And if you look at the next slide, it kind of gives you an idea of where we're at on our core project. So we've gotten the equipment that goes in our network centers and they've been configured to receive that new data information. We've been testing with multiple wireless providers to make sure that that connection is working. We've done testing with 911 centers outside of the Phoenix area. And so our next goal is PSAP by PSAP is to migrate them in the December, January timeframe. So we're in the middle of testing the system, and because we don't want to go live with such a major change without having kick the tires pretty good before we release it. And so then that was Ezina. Any questions on Ezina before I move on to the next one? Okay. Next is geographical information, GIS as we call it. GIS has every year become more important to 911. When cell phones came, it became a very vital portion of it. And now with the NG 911 core services, it's going to be even more. So we want to make sure that we have the appropriate information to route the calls appropriate to the correct PSAP. So how we've done that in our, how we've met our tasks. Go to the next one. Thank you. So all of that is getting work because the data, the addressing data had to have extra elements in it to have the next gen information. So our team and the state GIS have been working on collecting that and getting that populated into it. We've also included our GIS information in the state repository, so they have all the information that they can assist on passing that information on to other areas so that the state as a whole has everybody's GIS information. And so on the next one, you can see what's pending. And these are not going to be required, but I put them up there to make sure that when we developed our strategic plan, we had the idea that we would have to do a lot of stuff ourselves, and we would have to do 911 database management, which is currently with, has been with the phone company, CenturyLink Lumen. And we were going to take that portion on ourselves and train personnel, but with the project the state made, the vendor in that actually can take care of that for us. So it was outsourced. So we no longer need to worry about these because it's being handled by the company that is part of the project. Okay, and the next one, our equipment. So there's a big discussion on equipment, whether it's on premise, whether it's in a network center and how that goes. We wanted to make sure whatever our choice was, that it was something that was reliable and it could, we could install it without minimal impact with add NG 911 capabilities to it. And if we'll go to the tasks, one of the problems that we saw is not owning the equipment. And so owning the equipment was a priority for us. And I'll give you an example. As the state has moved to a different vendor providing, instead of the CenturyLink managed services that was procured back in 2016, they are now having to replace all that equipment because the PSAPs did not own the equipment. So it's done a huge spike in spending on, because all that equipment has. We, as the Maricopa region, will not have to have additional 911 PSAP equipment. They'll be able to transfer over without replacing, doing a forklift replacement. We have contracts in which we can purchase our equipment from. The state had MR911 participate with them on being on the board of an RFP that allowed us to pick out not only the 911 networking for NG 911, but also equipment that sits inside the PSAP. We are virtualizing more and more equipment as part of the NG process. So we're not having hardware that can fail. We're eliminating some of that. And we've also expanded our maintenance to include NG 911 and our monitoring. So with the 911 network comes a lot more monitoring, and we've been able to advance that so we can really keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the 911 network. And go to the next one. So a couple on equipment. We want to have a consistent replacement program. And so in the former strategic plan, it had a 6-year replacement that would allow us to stay within budget and to replace every PSAP within a rotation of 6 years of hardware equipment. That's not including upgrades to software. That's different. So this was only when equipment had to be replaced, is what it was in every 6 years. So that's, I think, one of the distinctions that we have struggled with on what's the difference between software version upgrade and a equipment completely new system. And then we are looking to broaden shared services capability. That's the ability to have multi-node or 911 equipment that's shared with their backroom equipment located in a different location. And then governance, we always love governance. We're part of MAG. So we want to make sure that we're doing things that's best to serve our public and to be able to keep them secure while also being mindful of our budget and making sure we're staying as much as we can ahead of technology. So if we go to the next one, we've accomplished quite a bit. We have a 911 working group that oversaw governance. They were able to come up with call routing enhancements, shared services, where if a 911 center is overwhelmed, and this was actually something that we used during COVID when there were PSAPs would be hit with their staffing already low, would also have so many out with COVID. This allowed them to not just turn their calls, 911 calls, over to another PSAP, but to share them so that their call volume when you could design it every way you want, every third call would be routed to this other agency, and they had processes in place where the call could get answered and get help and send the appropriate responders to it, but that they would share answering their 911 calls. We aligned with national standards. This is specifically on our call answering times that the National Emergency Number Association, or NENA, sets out a standard on how quickly 911 calls should be answered. And we made sure that we as a region as our goal to follow those. We talked about funding eligibility specifically for adding additional positions. We want to make sure that as the community grows, that they have the correct resources and to discover, how many positions does a 911 center need to add, if any, so to take a good look at that we're not overbuilding in any of the PSAPs. And then working with officials to modify legacy routing regulations. So the old school of Lumen, CenturyLink, and other wireline companies are now, instead of having that path, are migrated over into the IP network. So that puts, since 1985, a change on how those calls are delivered. So we still have a lot of things to do with everything that changes. It's going to need governance to go by it, making sure that we're strategizing on that we're looking at the strategic plan, maybe on a yearly basis to see about updates or anything we need to do. A lot of those last 3 things have to do with technical policies that will make sure that the 911 equipment, the equipment in a 911 center, not only 911 answering equipment, but their CAD and all their interfaces, making sure that we come up with policies say, this is what it has to be if it's going to interface appropriately. So this will always be growing our governance capability. And the next one. And the last one, and the funnest one, is the funding objective. We want to develop a consistent, stable fund. I think this has been, since I joined the team in 2003, funding has been a question mark because of all the volatility in the state coffers. So we need to have a funding source that's appropriate. So our objectives, I'm sad to say, go ahead to the next one, our tasks, we haven't met any of these. We ensured the funding supports NG 911. Well, actually we did. We made sure that we can cover legacy, old style equipment, along with start paying for the NG 911 to have those dual payments going while we make the transition. And make sure that as we budget, we consider the engineering upgrade costs and develop funding management processes that adequately support our largest area in the state, which is the Phoenix area. And to our pending, these are the ones that we have not completed. We haven't established a secure funding because there's too much sway in it. And we'll go over that in a minute. Working with the state to consider broadening the base. We haven't reached that point, is making sure that the 911 funding the way the legislation's written now, does it include newer technology? So it was written back in the day, does it need to be reworded so it recognizes newer technology that can contact 911? And then creating an agreed upon percentage that would be directed to the region. That has not happened. Any questions on all that fun stuff I went over very quickly?
I just had one question. You mentioned that the PSAP implementation will be starting December, January. Does that mean it'll be completed during that time frame? Or is that just the beginning of the project?
We anticipated at the beginning of the project, and it's done PSAP by PSAP, so it's not a complete forklift over to all of them. We have to touch each one individually. As we get into it and hit our stride, we'll be able to get them going faster, so we can do multiple, but it is PSAP by PSAP.
Do you have an approximate timeline when the entire project will be done?
For the region, we're hoping it'll be done by the end of January.
Thank you for the presentation. Quick question. What was the life cycle of your strategic plan?
It was a 7-year.
7-year. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Anyone else? Thanks. I think I had a lot of thoughts and maybe a list of questions, but I think maybe it'd be helpful to hear the fiscal overview because I think some of those tie together. So if there's not any questions specifically on the plan, and I do think one of the questions is I have, it was a 7-year plan. Is there anything, is that why versus 3 versus 5 versus 10? Is that just a number we picked? Was there anything behind that number?
I think it was just a number we picked. to tell you
Okay.
the truth.
No, so so the idea, if we're going to do another plan, it can either be longer or it could be shorter. There's nothing set about the 7 years. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
Okay. If no questions, let's move to agenda item number 4 on the fiscal overview.
Okay, so the financial report, go ahead to the next one. So I don't know if you can tell there, these 2 bars represent, the darker green represents the contributions made by the Maricopa region based on a 62.4% population. And then the lighter green has to do with how much we've allocated, how much we were allocated by the state. 2015, 2016, those fiscal years are a little deceiving because back in those times, the state would approve budgets with conditions on them. If there was enough money by the end of the fiscal year, then we will approve you to do upgrades. So while it looks like they approved, they really didn't. They didn't use all those monies. And then in 2017 was the year that it kind of caught up to us, and that was an approved amount. And to explain that, that is a Phoenix PD project. So anytime we do Phoenix PD, which is 102 911 call stations, it is a spike in our budget just naturally because of the size that they are. And so we try not to do any other projects the year we do Phoenix PD. One is because it takes a lot of resources, and the other one is because of the cost. So we'll do one smaller PSAP this year. We're doing Luke Air Force Base. And so in 2017, that's the same. And then as we go back down, you can see where where the system goes down.
Let's step back just for a
Yep.
second. You're making a presumption we understand what's behind those numbers. What's driving those numbers? What creates that number?
So
Budget is just an allocation out of the state's general fund, or what is it tied to?
yeah, so the state collects approximately statewide $18 million,
From?
the 911 tax from your cell phone
Okay.
bill, your monthly cell phone bills, and your telephone bills as well.
Okay.
And so of that 18 million,
You
the lot,
say 18 million, how far back would you say 18 million? I mean, cell phones and communication devices have been increasing, I'm assuming, so is that a number from an estimate? How old is that estimate?
it goes back, I want to say, to 2007, because prior to that, we had a 37-cent collection and we're at 20 cents now. So if you remember, we were collecting quite a bit of money, and our needs weren't as strong because the technology wasn't there. So the state was able to, because of the statute, they can roll the money over. It doesn't go into the general fund. And because of that, they had a pretty big account going of monies being rolled over. And then when the bubble burst in 2008, we had a series of funding sweeps out of there. And I think 3 or 4 years, the state went and swept money to the amount of 53 million total that was taken out of the 911 fund. So so not only that, then the statute lowers the collection. So now it's at 20 cents.
Okay, so when did that happen?
That happened in 2009.
Oh, okay. So since 2009, it's been 20 cents.
Yeah.
And you think that, and where does the 18 million go back that far, or?
yeah, so the 18 million goes to about then. Before 2009, it was more.
So, but has there been any growth since 2009 in that number, or,
Slightly.
but it's been pretty flat?
Yeah, it's been pretty flat.
Okay.
And with population, when we had population moving out, it took a dip, and now it's coming back a little bit, but it's still,
I don't know, is it MAG population? I mean, I'm assuming since 2009, the population's grown by what, 2% a year, maybe more?
so when we were at where we were losing it, it went to about between 16 million and 17 million. When after the bubble burst and people were leaving Arizona, that's when we saw the population decrease slightly. And then as they've come back, it's come back to about 18 million.
I'd be curious if there's any community around this table that lost population in the last 10 years. I don't think
Yeah.
we have.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yeah.
could, there was a dip in collections.
Oh, collections, okay,
Yeah, so
but not population, so.
historically been holding around 18 million annually statewide. We did see some dips, 16, 17 million. It's back to that steady 18 million. So prevailing for budgetary purposes, 18 million is what we see every year.
So Nathan, it seems like the number of providers, right, since 2009, I'm assuming there's a tremendous amount more providers, right? Points where somebody's have to report and collect this taxes. Does the state ever do an audit or request of that? Are we aware of?
From what the state had told me before, because I had the same question, is that it's handled by the DOR and they don't want the Department of Revenue, and they they don't have access to audit the information. They have to request in a formal audit, which I think would be appropriate.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think just intuitively, when the tax was lowered in the 2000s, it was anticipated we were seeing growth, of course. And with growth, that assumed the collection was going to increase markedly. So it was decreased to 20 cents. However, even with our population growth, we've held largely constant at the 18 million. So it's probably an opportunity to kind of dig into those numbers.
I was thinking about all the teenagers and everybody else who has a phone. I mean, the number of phones per household has probably increased significantly too, I would imagine. Okay. Yeah, oh, Kevin, please go ahead.
So I just want to make sure I understand the graph here then. One is we're looking at the revenue generated by a population percentage. And if I look at those numbers, looks like over the last 4 budgets cycles, we've probably had about 8 million supplanted based on that percentage. If we received exactly the amount that we should be based on our percentage, is that about 8 million? Am I reading that right? Over the last 4 years?
So based on,
Because our allocation is less, correct, than
Yeah.
what we're actually receiving is less than what our percentage allocation would be.
right,
$2 million a year.
So that's about $8 million. And then, so that money's gone somewhere else.
it's reallocated to the rest of the state.
Right.
Because the
Correct.
state fund is not distributed by what we put into it.
So that's the word I use is supplanting. So there is
Yeah.
money supplanted out of the region here into the state. And then I guess my second question is, that's based on a population percentage, but it would seem to me that the number of devices and that the tax is applicable to would be not the same throughout the entire state. So have we looked at it from an actual revenue collected perspective within the Maricopa versus what's been received back? Because I would suspect that in an urbanized area, you have more eligible. You have obviously businesses have phones. You have a higher percentage of versus population. So I'm guessing that $8 million number is actually in reality, when we look at collected versus distribution, was significantly more than 8 million.
I agree, but we don't get access to what areas donated what by DOR. So that's what we based it on the population. So it could be, if we look at it, not population, but device, that could give a different meaning. We can investigate if that would be a possibility, if DOR tracks that when they collect it, or how that is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not drawing a conclusion I understand what has to happen. We are one state, there's always a movement of money in and around, but I would just be curious. I mean, at some point, we've gone backwards in some ways in terms of the funding. The technical challenges and the amount of resiliency and the amount of feature sets that we're now demanded of have increased while we've been somewhat flatlined. And then on top of that, we're supplanting money. It shouldn't be a real big surprise then that we've got some challenges in this area.
Agreed. If we look at the next slide, is a
Hold
different.
on, Liz,
I'm sorry.
Dan has a question.
Sorry, I just want to clarify something. Back in the 2016 timeframe, it was my understanding that the tax was per plan, not per line. Did I get that wrong? Is it per line?
So that's one of the things we're not sure of. So some of the carriers, so in my home, I have 3 devices on my plan, and they each one do receive a tax, but we're not sure that all of them do that. The other thing is voice over IP PBXs. So if you have a PBX that they have traditionally, and I'm going to have to get technical, go by the T1s, and those have 26, I think, inside of them, and they're taxed individually for that. But now that it's IP and it's not circuit specific, then so if I have 1,000 lines on my PBX, what does that mean for the 911 tax? Could they all call 911? Yes, but are they taxed? That's a gray area that's never been addressed since 911 came in.
Thank you.
Yes, Josh.
Yeah, this may be another question we need to research, but I'm curious on the taxation side of this, where the point of the transaction is deemed to occur. So we all get a cell phone bill. Obviously, we can see those taxes on there, but is it based on the address that's assigned to that account of the customer and that determines whether you're in the Maricopa region or not? Or is it based on the number and where that number originated? Because as you know, today, these are extremely portable technologies. You can have a number from a completely different state that is obviously being used here. And there's probably a lot of other complications to that and figuring out really where did the transaction occur. And I don't know if that's something we need to look into. And then how quickly is that being moved over? I know I've seen that on my cell phone bill as I've moved at times, that it doesn't actually carry over for a while. You're still being assessed a tax rate from where the line originated, even though you've moved across the country at that point.
I'm guessing, this is my presumption, that the state collects it as a whole and doesn't itemize it by what city you're in, but they do it by the billing address. So if I'm a winter visitor, I'm paying for 911 wherever that bill is originating from. So I'm in Minnesota, then that's Minnesota's getting that tax. But we will absolutely ask the state if they can provide that for us, but I'm not sure that they itemize it out saying this is what the Maricopa region paid into it, Pinal, Pima, and such.
Yes, please.
Do we have a graph, and maybe it's one that you just haven't shown yet, that also shows how much of that money we claimed every year
How much money, what?
that we actually spent?
No.
Could we get that information too?
Yes. So we go to the next slide. So this one's a, there we go. So here's a better, based on, it's the same as the green, the former slide, but this shows a little bit the percentage of what we spent, given it to numbers. Keeping in mind in 2015, 2016, those were the ones we approved on the budget, but at the end of the fiscal year, those monies were pulled. This is our grant award for 2023. Our current one, we're at the top. We had asked for 12.7. We were approved 9.4 million. And each of those represents all the 911 systems in the state, a total of a little over $22 million. What's the budget? And if you remember, we're only at 18 million on our collections. So as I stated before, the 911 monies roll over and are collected. In 2020, when they started the grant process, it was our accounts were rolling over approximately 40 million. And in the last state report, it was at 12 million. So they've been diligent on spending the money to make sure that it's not vulnerable for sweeps. But then we get into the question of how low do we make that rainy day fund, as it were, to where we've overcommitted ourselves and we don't have the collection. Then we don't have the 22 million, but we have an 18 million that we can spend from and no contingency funds. But of that 22 million, 43% represents the Maricopa region. So those earlier slides are based on what the collection was. This is based on what the state is putting towards other areas.
How much of, so each year, there's a timing process that they ask for a requested amount from each of these regions.
That is correct.
Okay. And then they give you an approved budget.
Yes.
And then what's the approved admin? Is that just part of the budget process from their side? Is that their number that they're approving?
In the state statute, it allows a certain percentage to go to administration funds for the state 911 office and also to the 911 systems to help them do administrative things. that to support that fiscally. And based on the state's calculations, we were given 150,390 to take care of administrative costs as in support and office supplies. So between that, gets eaten up by those things.
And that award amount, how much does that change from year to year?
The admin or the as
The
a
full
whole.
total? Is that
Um,
quite a variation or is it pretty consistent from year to year?
It's pretty consistent.
Yes, Dan?
This quick question. Is this amount your total operating budget, capital budget, both? Could you maybe talk about that? These numbers that we're looking at right here.
Yep. So the approved budget, 9.2 million, that budget represents all the monthly costs that we pay to carriers to have our network and reimbursement for 911. So those monthly carrier costs, it also includes maintenance of we supply the maintenance personnel. So we do maintenance. It also includes equipment for upgrades. It also includes spare parts, things as working capital. So everything that does 911 except the administration part of it, the budgeting and such, comes out of that number.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood because grant sounds like something optional, but really this is how you fund your operations.
So the state would traditionally had started out by having that the 911 systems would do a purchase order and then get the product. So let's say in 2015, Scottsdale has an upgrade. We get a quote, we do our own purchase order. And then we would, when we get invoice, we'd turn it over to the state with our approval and they would pay for it directly. And that was very problematic on procurement processes because it hadn't really matured like procurement needs to be these days. And so the state decided they would put it through the grant process, even though it's not a true grant. They would help them track it better and manage it better if they did it in the grant process. And so that's how that excise tax was put into the grant process.
Thank you.
Liz, can you make a call to Human, find out how you can ask for something and then get more?
Yeah, I saw that. So this is an instance where they had to have all their equipment replaced because they didn't own the
They
equipment.
didn't ask for it.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going. I don't know the answer. I don't know we have the answer, but whatever they're doing,
Yeah.
it's working pretty well.
I'll place a call.
Here, no, have more.
Yeah. So some of the challenges we've had, if you go to the next slide, is, back, there we go. So it is very difficult to manage our budget using the grant process. And we use grants and they're usually about for a specific thing, but where there's so much, there needs to be flexibility within the budgets because we don't know what's needs that might come up that weren't identified. And if we're doing our regular grants that we get from the federal, we have to follow these strings and we're only identifying this one little area. But another example is trying to, for the city of Phoenix, when we create a purchase order, we've encumbered funds and those are stay with the fiscal year, even if it's not paid out till after in the beginning of the next fiscal year. And the grant process does not allow that. So as big as our budget is and how many invoices we have coming through, it has to stop by June 30th. Then we have this great big overage that we have to go through and ask, can it be pushed over? It's just very complicated. I appreciate the wanting to be able to manage it better, but some of the obstacles that it puts in our way makes it very difficult to do.
So you're saying it's difficult from the state's perspective or to roll over funds that have already been encumbered into the next calendar or fiscal year?
So it's difficult for me and my team to, on the procurement end of it, because you have to be able to purchase, invoice, and receive the equipment all before June 30th. And that's not realistic when you are, it's like a living organism that you're constantly, different things change, things that you need, equipment, supply chains, that's hit us big time. So we'll order things in November and it still hasn't shipped in April, May. So we're scrambling to be able to say, we've done our due diligence, but it's getting close to June and we don't have the equipment. So it's violating the grant because we're having to pay for it after June 30th.
You're violating the grant from the state's perspective?
Yeah, the state's perspective.
Okay, we'll go down that rabbit hole another day.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And there are unspent monies left on the table. And this is something we're trying to resolve on being able to reallocate it. But that can be difficult as well because it requires this, if it's within our footprint, and we're not asking for additional money, but we're just reallocating. It still has to go through the state approval process to reallocate funds within the budget. And then participation of the PSAPs in the budget development, that's another challenge that we are trying to resolve. And if you go to our opportunities on the next slide, some things that we're trying to improve to help our budget process and to help with the PSAPs is we'll be giving fiscal reports on all of our meetings for PSAP as well as 911 oversight, so they can see where monies are being taken, unexpected costs, things that didn't cost as much, things that are waiting to pay. We also have the PSAP budget working group that is going to have more involvement in developing the budget and insight on that. And then we're also looking to create a process of when we do have truly unidentified unspent monies, how we can reallocate them and seeing if we can get the state to help streamline that process as well so that we can get those monies reallocated quickly and spent. But the one thing we always want to make sure is that we're being good stewards with the money. So there's that fine line of not overspending and leaving too much monies on the table and also cutting ourselves off at the knees because we've spent monies that was needed for another area. So we're trying to find that balance of getting new technology without breaking the bank, basically. And my fiscal report.
Is that it? Any?
Yep.
Yes, Dan.
Thank you. I apologize if I missed this. What are your buckets of funding sources? So we saw the table with the state grants. You said the administration costs or something like that are not included in that number. What are your funding sources?
The state is our only funding source.
So who pays for this, the administration or whatever that was that you said is not included in that
That's
number?
the 150,000.
Okay.
It pays for an administrative position to manage.
And then you said federal grants, I believe.
So we do, we haven't had federal grants, but in the past we have had federal grants that we've used. The state does get federal grants, but they've used it to upgrade the state as ENET. So there are federal grants, they're just not allotted to us.
So the region collectively doesn't contribute some funds beyond what the state is providing you through those grants?
There are some MAC funds that are, and I'll let Nathan speak to this.
Yeah, I will. Thank you. So as part of the dues and assessments for MAG, there's about 173,000 that's collected that's pushed over to defray some of the administration costs.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Liz on this? I know we need to come back. think the answer is there's too many questions for today. So we'll just keep moving along. So the intent is to continue this conversation for some, we're not going to solve everything today. This is kind of a kickoff. So I think there'll be plenty of opportunity to come back and have more discussion. So Liz, thank you for that presentation. So that concluded your fiscal overview. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So are we ready for item 5? All right. So the next agenda item is an update on the activities of the MAG PSAP Managers Group. So Brittany Brunette is here, chair of the MAG PSAP Managers, and will provide us an update.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to speak on some stuff on behalf of co-chair Karen Sutherland and myself. You know, I think we all know why we're here today and what landed us in this study committee. Amongst us PSAP managers, there's a growing concern within the Maricopa region due to the service received. We're lacking compared to the rest of the state, considering we are the biggest county and the biggest population. Yet we have the least amount of resources. We have counties and PSAPs throughout the rest of the state who have more resources, technology, and interoperable capabilities than the Maricopa County region, and that shouldn't be okay. That is definitely something that we should be looking at, and what can we do to grow from that? Just touching on a 10,000 foot level, again, some of this we're not all going to solve today, but definitely stuff that we want to touch on. Those resources being equipment, communication, and sustainability. In regards to equipment, we need to consider the question, is MR911 going to be able to do what we need with equipment in order to move us forward as a region? In regards to equipment, some of that being bandwidth within the region, having the best technology as we go to NG911, talking about hot seating and maps, just to name a few. Talking about communication, we feel there's a lack of consistent communication, challenges with communication, and sometimes no communication coming from MR911 throughout our PSAPs in the region. Just to give an example, Chandler PD and Mesa PD in regards to their Viper upgrade, Scottsdale PD and Glendale PD's communication reference additional equipment for their upgrade, and now all remaining PSAPs within the region receiving options for equipment and add-ons. Sustainability, is MR911 going to be able to sustain the regional growth with NG911? Is their staff going to be able to be at a level compared to other subject matter experts within the NG911 industry? With the number of technicians they employ, is MR911 going to be able to sustain PSAP needs within the region? In addition, keep up with the needed upgrades. A 6-year cycle is not acceptable. In closing, as Karen and I are sitting on this committee as representatives of all PSAP managers, we will continue to bring forth thoughts, concerns, and ideas to this committee as representatives of all Maricopa PSAP managers. Not everything we discuss will be our own opinions. It'll be bringing forth opinions from PSAP managers that we collect. Lastly, we do feel there are no subject matter experts on this committee besides MR911 staff. I think we need to look beyond subject matter experts, such as bringing the state 911 office to the table to present facts possibly on budget and funding and hear a report from them, as long as bringing outside subject matter experts in regards to technology. We do need to look beyond and see what's out there beyond what's sitting at this table. We look forward to working with every single person present here today and coming to a long-term solution that will benefit the region as a whole. Thank you
very much. That was well done. Thank you. And just to some of your points, I think Mr. Phelps and I've already had a discussion with staff. We're going to talk about this at the end about recognizing that we do need to bring in best in class kind of reviews of not just what we do, but across the country. So we'll get into that conversation here
Okay,
shortly.
thank you.
So some very good points, and that's very helpful. So thank you for that. All right. We're ready to go to item 6. The next agenda item is an update on the activities of the MAG 911 oversight team. Scott Walker, Chair of the 911 oversight team, will provide this update.
So good morning, Chairman Brady and Chairman Phelps. I'm Scott Walker. For those that may not know me, I'm the Executive Assistant Fire Chief with the Phoenix Fire Department. I currently serve as the Chairman of the 911 oversight team. And for full transparency, in my role as the Executive Assistant Fire Chief, I do oversee the Maricopa Regional 911 group within this Phoenix Fire Department. I want to start by saying thank you, or start by saying that as the Chairman of the 911 oversight team, I look forward to this process and to what will ultimately be developed as a result of the study committee's work. As we begin this process, I believe it is important that we acknowledge that the majority of 911 calls made in the state of Arizona, approximately 65%, are made within the MAG region. This is an important metric we cannot lose sight of from both a risk-benefit perspective, as well as the importance of the structure in which we manage our region. I do believe that the current model of having a dedicated group solely focused on the management of 911 call processing within our region has served us well for more than 2 decades and can continue to serve us well into the future. The goal of the 911 oversight team is to provide oversight to the process of managing 911 call routing and to ensure that when a 911 call is placed within the MAG service area, that call is delivered timely to the correct public safety answering point, ensuring that the needed emergency services are not delayed. I believe that I speak for all the members of the oversight team. We take this responsibility very seriously. I strongly believe that as public safety officials tasked with providing oversight to the MR911 process, our primary goal is to ensure that a resilient, high availability system is in place and functioning at all times. Our priority must be focused on eliminating the potential of any type of service delivery issues as it relates to 911 call processing. As this committee works to develop a vision and strategic direction for the future of our region, I encourage everyone to be open to and consider all points of view and consider all new and developing technologies that may offer greater efficiencies to our system. This approach would be consistent with past practices of MR911, our service area, which was evident in the adoption of the text to 911 within the Maricopa region, really outside of one other PSAP in the state. We were the leader in that. I think everybody probably recalls that a few years ago. That said, I would caution that due to the risk to our community, if we fail, we consider all potential impacts and risks before making commitments. Simply put, when a person's life may be at risk, we may not want to be on the bleeding edge of a new technology. And finally, from my own perspective in this environment now for several years, a few of the areas that I believe we should be considering for the future of our region include the following. Ensure that we are providing a clear vision and direction of where this region collectively wants to go. Work to identify new technologies that may be available to provide our PSAPs with more effective tools. Work to ensure the continued stability and resiliency within our system and network. Work to secure consistent funding from the state of Arizona. We've already heard a little bit about that. That can be managed within our region while still ensuring accountability to the state ADOA office. And finally, I believe we should explore and consider the potential of creating some type of an agreement, maybe an intergovernmental agreement with the state of Arizona that clearly outlines the responsibilities of the state 911 rule, as well as the responsibilities of the MR911 rule. I'm happy to answer any questions that the group may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Chair Walker. All right. Any questions for these 2 individuals? That was very helpful. And I'll let Kevin speak also, but just as we go into this next steps, I think at least from my perspective, I think this is both a conversation that there's a lot of things going on. I know there's kind of this discussion that's been happening over the last several months about looking at just the current system we have today and whether it's meeting the needs of our different communities at whatever level they may be. And we acknowledge that and recognize that and understand that that's something that needs to be addressed. There's also the need to have a strategic plan. Now, whether it's a 7-year or a 3-year or whatever it is in between, we also need to address that issue going forward. But we also, I think this is the timing of this works well for us to, as I was saying before, is to kind of step back and say, okay, what can we do best together as a region? And this is one of the probably the most critical things that we do together as a region. Yes, we do transportation and a lot of other things that are really important to MAG, but from a quality of life and life itself, this is critical. And so there's this balance, we're always feeling it, right? This push and pull between how do we do that all together in this large region with the diversity it is, yet at the same time, we have so many common goals. So my hope is that together we can find out where those opportunities are to stay together and come up with the best system for our region. And I would say this from my perspective, everything's on the table, right? But that doesn't mean we blow everything up. It just says that we need to evaluate the things that we can control. And I think that's what we have to start with, right? First, we have to start with a lot of things that we know that we can, decisions we can make that we can control. There's obviously the state of Arizona is very much involved in this conversation from a funding standpoint and influence. 6-7 years ago, they were telling us CenturyLink was the end game that was going to provide us the assurance we needed forever. I didn't hear CenturyLink mentioned too many times in this discussion. Now there's another vendor. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying it just shows you the movement in this conversation, right? I think we have to think in terms of what we think is the best technology today. 3-5 years now can be completely different. So somehow in this conversation and decisions as we go forward, we need to think, how do we develop those kinds of systems, right? And how can we respond? So to that end, one of the things we've talked about with the staff, and Kevin and I did, is about the opportunity to bring on outside consultants who can look at this from a best practices standpoint and really kind of help us see what are the best practices there are across the country through the whole spectrum of everything we're doing. So because we can kind of piecemeal what is not working well or what works well for us and try to adjust, I think it's an opportunity for a fresh look to say, okay, across the country, I don't know, across maybe beyond that, but at least in the major metropolitan areas, who's doing this really well that we kind of would like to at least learn more about and know more about, and what are those best practices? So I think that was one proposal we were going to present, is this idea that we would go and go through that process. There's already a state list of consultants that are already out there. So there would have to be a decision about selecting those. I think individuals from this committee should be part of that, and also providing the scope of work for the consultants and the continued follow-up with them. So that's something I would propose that we consider. I also say, while we're doing that in that procurement process, I'd like to see more follow-up on the conversations we've started today, so that as that consultant comes on, we're better informed and educated with each other about, what are the issues, and start articulating that into some kind of a white paper or something so we can all see it together. Because I know what'll happen is we all walk away from this meeting with what we thought was discussed or we thought everybody understood, and that it may not be the case. I think there's an opportunity for us to spend some time really kind of coming up with that common thread. So I'll stop there. Kevin, you have anything you might want to share?
Well, I would certainly echo the comments. Two thoughts. One on the notion of bringing on board, additional resources to help us analyze that. I really appreciate what Scott mentioned from the oversight team, is making sure we balance, technology with making sure we don't lose our ability to operate every day. This is not a great place to be always experimenting. However, we also have to decide, do we want to do best practices, which I've never found best practices being at the forefront of technology. It's basically a middle of the road approach. And maybe we want to be somewhere in between, leading on the technology side. Otherwise, if you just go best practice, it's usually a lagging indicator in terms of where things are at. So I think bringing a consultant on board can help us balance that push to newer technology platforms, while still, as I think you correctly brought out, that we have to be careful that we don't get too cute with the system to where we have some interoperability issues. The second point being is, I think in going back to our 7-year plan, a lot of success driven there in many areas. But to have a number of items in the strategic plan that it had zero success on would say that I think those were in the sustainability and the physical side. And to say we really just haven't made any progress there as we go forward, we probably need to rethink our strategy for that. Because again, we made a lot of progress in a number of items that's, I think, certainly to be commended. But I think collectively as a group, we're going to have to come up with a better strategy if we're saying there's been zero progress on some of these items in the 7-year plan. We're too far down in this plan to still be saying we haven't had any deliverables in that area. Again, not at all placing blame, but I think we should focus a little more on that as well.
Any other thoughts or comments about going forward with some outside assistance and kind of working on a scope of work? Any feedback from that?
Chairman?
Yes, please.
So I would 100% agree with both of you. I think it never hurts to look outside, to bring in the experts. I'm certainly not an IT technology expert. I've learned a lot over the last several years, but certainly reaching out, bringing people in to give us some direction, some insight, all it's going to do is validate either how we're doing it is correct or find a better way of doing it. We're not going to choose a worse way. So I think that's a great idea and that certainly add value to our work.
Chair,
Oh, yes, Dan.
I would also agree. I think it's a great idea and would be happy to participate in any selection process if we're involved in that.
Eric or Nate, any thoughts about maybe kind of helping us understand what this process would look like to move forward in this direction?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's enough direction here today, and we've already started a preliminary look at consultants on per state contract provisions. So we can continue that work, assemble a subgroup if folks want to just self-select, or if this group wants to choose.
I think we've kind of already created these, I don't know, we've got the MAG oversight team. And so we've got the PSAP managers group. We've got the technology group. I mean, they're already represented here. Are we missing anybody if we choose those that are on this list? I mean, I think that was the whole point of creating this list, right? Is to be well represented.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we could definitely work with the members.
I would just say this, and I don't know what the relationship is between Phoenix Fire and Phoenix PD, but I just want to make sure that if there's one agency in this state that relies upon, at least as far as capacity to manage the system, it's got to be Phoenix PD. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, we have to look them in the eye and say, does this work for you? I mean, all it works for us, but I mean, I think we look at the volumes of calls coming in. I think we'd all be recognize that. So what I would recommend, I don't know how this would work. I mean, do we need a person from each one of these groups, or would we just have someone from each one of these groups agree to be part of this?
Yeah, with that as listed would be 5 members. So the PSAP chair, MAGTech chair, oversight team chair, with addition of Phoenix PD and Mr. Cotterman is
Okay.
5, probably a good number to work with.
Is that anybody offended by that you're not on that committee? Okay. Let's do that. And I think there needs to be the 2 parts to this, right? Well, and maybe there's more, Nate, help me out. We need to obviously have that group go through help with the selection, defining the qualifications. But we also need to, I think as a group, also kind of decide what that scope of work is going to look like, right? And so maybe I know we haven't said a whole lot, but maybe a draft of what that might be, so that, because we don't want to make an assumption again, we all leave here and think, oh, the consultants are going to look at this, and then we're told, no, you're only looking at this part of it. So let's start working on that. And then the qualifications, obviously, for these different consultants and so I think the proposal here, as I understand it, there's already a select group identified on a state contract. I don't know what that number is, And what would the process be for, I mean, you'd have that group, they're already pre-selected, but you would want to choose one from there. So we would ask them to submit qualifications, or what was that process look like?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we can definitely work for that. Maybe statement of qualifications. I know that Liz, maybe Audrey had looked at the list. I don't know if you have any other input.
The list had multiple vendors on it, but some of them were specialized in GIS. But the ones that would be 911 specific of what we're looking at, we recognized 3 of them. Ones that have, there's 2 of them in fact, all 3 of them have worked in different areas in the state, so they have a understanding about Arizona.
Yeah, I think the process that I'd recommend is that the 5 work on the draft scope of work, have a recommendation for maybe a preferred consultant or maybe 1 or 2, don't know. And then reconvene this group to review that draft scope, make sure everybody's on board. We can actually post it for action also, and consultant. That kind of ties up that whole process very nicely. Maybe give us a day or 2 to think about that, just because of the scope and we want to make sure we get it right. And when we do meet, that we have a draft scope that should be pretty close to the final document too. I just don't know how long it's going to take. So talking a couple weeks, probably. That's just my guess.
That's what'll be on the next agenda for sure. Are there any other topics? We covered a lot today. Was there anything that triggered somebody's thought about maybe something, we could still be, I still want this group to be having ongoing discussions, because I can tell we got some pretty high level, just, comments, but I recognize there's more to be said. Is there anything else for the future? Yeah, thank you. Items that you would like to see on the agenda. I mean, maybe we could have a little more detail from the PSAPs or others, or kind of just sharing with us their perspective. We need to be somewhat, we need to put it on an agenda. Is there any other thoughts you think would be helpful for this committee to hear a report from, or comments on, a prepared presentation that would be helpful for us? Kevin.
I mean, I think sound like the procurement can be fairly quick in some regards, but I think time is of essence to a degree. And so I think being focused on that, I'm wondering if we can't do some things in parallel rather than sequentially. And I'm wondering if there couldn't be an independent groups, assuming that we have a qualified technology consultant that understands the technology. If that person were on board today, what is the kind of the work that we're going to ask them to start doing? And maybe we have a separate group starting to come up with, once they are on board, what are we going to ask them to do? What are the things we want to prioritize for them, so that when we do bring them on board, we can almost automatically transition into that.
I think that's kind of where we're headed, right? I think we're, but are you maybe?
Well, I see it different as scope of work.
Okay.
The scope of work just says, this is kind of the areas we want to cover. Do we want to come up with a priority and actually a list of what we would like to see done? That could be done more by maybe by our oversight and PSAP committees, and technologists could come up with that body of work.
What that's okay. So maybe that's an opportunity for you all to go back to your groups. Say the decision of this group has been to bring on a consultant. We haven't identified that person yet, but start putting together a list of the things that, the questions, concerns you would like consultant to look into. We've used broad terms like best practices in a major metropolitan area, something that can help us define that. And it would be helpful if we hear from you all, or everyone on this committee. What are the questions you would like, if the consultant were sitting interviewing you, which may happen, and you had the opportunity to ask them any question, 5 or 6 questions, what would those be? Is that right, Kevin? Okay. I think it's a great way, and talk to your folks, the folks that you're representing, the 2 chairs, or your agencies. And then maybe that's what we can have that ready. So when we're selecting the consultant, we can be ready to move forward on that. Yeah, Josh.
Mr. Chair, one other item that I think would be helpful, and I'm not clear if this will be part of the scope of work of the consultant, is the whole fiscal
Yeah,
piece.
I agree.
It strikes me that a lot of the challenges we've heard today are really resource driven. And it seems like I'm getting a lot of nodding of heads around the table. And so it seems like there might be some further discussion about how the state does its part in this that we need to keep at the forefront that may not be what the consultant spends their time looking at.
I don't disagree. I think the question becomes, I don't know how much that's going to change with the new administration. I don't know the policy change, but the personalities may change.
Yeah, I realize there's some legislative
What would
realities.
you-
Yeah,
How would you propose to do it? Help me out with that.
I think I'd just like to understand it better. You mentioned even, audit as a possibility. I think I'd just like to understand how the money flows a little bit more clearly. Some of the things I think we all were scratching our heads when we heard some of the numbers. And it was like, how did you get from that to that? That doesn't quite make sense to me. So
Here's, I think, our dilemma, and I agree with you 100%. I think there will be a time when we need to, and we did this last time, we were very careful about it, inviting the state to come to this meeting. But I think and I agree, I think we need to do that. I think it's the timing of when we're ready to do that. So, because there may be more questions than just, that.
Right.
So
no objection.
I agree with
that.
I agree
Yeah.
with what you're saying. I'm trying to figure out, are we ready for that yet?
I don't know that we need to do that at the
Right,
next
but I
meeting.
think we put that on
I just
the-
don't want to lose sight of
No,
it
no.
as we go through the
Absolutely
operational
on
side
board
of
with
it.
you.
Yeah.
That's going to have to happen, right?
Yeah.
We have to ask that question. And I do think we need to figure out that comment about how do we go in this as with them saying, hey, it's not the state. We want to know from the modeling and the taxing, is it being collected correctly? Let's go back to the enabling the legislation, and the DOR says, well, we're too busy tracking down bed tax or whatever. Well, what would it take for us to help them? What would it cost to do an audit? Maybe, for us to find another $3 million, we'd spend 30,000, whatever. I don't know what's going to cost. We may be offered it. How can we, they usually don't ask us anyway. They just spend it, but we could offer. I don't know. Just think about that, Nathan and Eric, how we could approach that concept.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, we do have some contacts at DOR that we might be able to kind of do some exploration about kind of getting behind the scenes and seeing how this actually works too. So we'll see.
Because the part about collecting it and how that's being collected, and there's a whole different question about allocation and how that decision is made. So we got to kind of separate those two, because on one hand, we're just saying, hey, state, we just need to help make sure we're all getting the taxes collected into this big pot. Now, once it's there, then let's have a conversation about how does the decision tree and allocation be made.
And with the change in administration too, there's likely to be change in leadership at DOA, and it could be change in leadership in the state 911 office too. So I think kind of holding off on inviting them in is probably a good idea,
Yeah,
because
that's
I
what I
think there
was
will be change.
But it's a conversation we need to have. Yeah, Dan.
One last thought on that. At the appropriate time, when we're talking about the state, I think it might be good for this group to perhaps see the presentation that they've been doing to all of our different agencies, where they're talking about different capabilities that are out there as we're looking to compare and evaluate our system. I thought that might be a good
I
backdrop.
think, and I think that's why, to me, having a third-party neutral consultant do that, as opposed to having the group that controls the funding and determines how much money you get, making that decision too. So I think maybe there'll be an opportunity for that, but I don't want this to become the sales pitch for the latest vendor. I think that's, to me, why I wanted to bring the consultant in, because I wanted to kind of push back on this idea that, because I've already gone through the sales pitch from the state once, and guess what? CenturyLink is not being phased out as quickly as possible, what I've been told. So I don't, maybe it's great. It's not, it's more about time and place. And so maybe what we asked the consultants to do is go look at, because maybe what's being presented is really the best first in class. It was built for that. They went to the federal government. They got all the, maybe it is. But I want to hear that from a, you know, a neutral third party, not from somebody else, at least my perspective. I don't know. But I do think there'll be an opportunity for that. We need to hear that. I don't know if I want to hear it from the state. It feels like I'd be empowering them now to make decisions for us. And I don't know that that's their role. At least I don't, it should be. But that's just my. Anything, Kevin, last?
No, I think you're going down the right area. I mean, because I think there's an option kind of in between. A lot of it is, you know, where do we want governance coming from? That's a huge part of the system is the ability to respond quickly and to make sure things are taken care of promptly. So one model could be if the state has a technology model that works. It doesn't mean that MR 911 just doesn't implement either through a separate vendor contract or whatever, that same technology. So I think getting the state in, kind of pitching that maybe does kind of cloud that a little bit. But I think our consultant will certainly look at all the different options that are out there and bring it back to us. I think that's a good way to do it.
And I would say to the state is, listen, if you hear about some great new idea that's not AT&T anymore, it's somebody else. Well, how do we have this conversation together before you're, you know, we're going down that, making that decision path. So, I mean, sitting around here, you guys represent some of the largest 911 operations in the country. I mean, this is big stuff. And so we've got to make the decision the right way. Okay, anything else for the good of the order before we, so I think we're going to meet again, but we're going to give a little bit of time to get this consultant review. You're going to put together your questions, send those to Nathan. Nathan, can you also collect? I would like, if you don't mind, the comments that you two all shared. You're reading them, so that was very impressive. Do you mind if you gave those to Nathan so the rest we could have those for us to review afterwards? That would be very, very helpful for us. And then Liz, also your presentations. I think we have those online, or do we have those online yet?
Those are online.
Yeah. So as long as there's a place where we can go and get these and follow up, that'd be awesome. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great Thanksgiving.